Tulum waters are life for the world. We are on top of one of the world's largest network of fresh water that flows through the Yucatan Peninsula, linking the water to the coral reef and into the ocean. For the Mayan elders, these waters were holy. They protected them and used their powers carefully. For the last 5 years, I've called this Mayan paradise home, where I became a mother of 2 children. As a mother, you recognize the importance of community living and the essential needs of clean water and clean food. Our most pressing issue in Tulum is the lack of a proper septic system and waste management system, which is altering the delicate ecology balance of the region. We present to you Tulum Water Project. With the help of Dr. Bernard, we are creating a microorganism farm where we will grow beneficial bacteria that rebalance the natural bioflora of the water systems of Yucatan. We already have land for this project that is located 2 kilometers from the biggest garbage dump in Tulum. That's where we will start to target the problem first. We are collaborating with local schools and awareness programs to educate the community through storytelling and yoga, changing their relationship to water, empowering them into being healthy agents of their environment. Meet Bernard. He came to the Yucatan Peninsula in 1978 to study Mayan agriculture, pioneering in the rainforest restoration, organic farming techniques. He currently reconstructed a 2,000-year-old Mayan village. We see this as the future evolution as water gives life and continuity. As the world crumbles, a new way of being is crystallizing. Collectively, our actions may well determine the future of our world. I dream of a conscious human society that practices forgiving instead of forgiving us a purpose that's bigger than ourselves. By implementing permaculture and biomimicry to produce abundance for all life while enhancing the health of the biosphere. Now we're giving opportunities for all the other world lovers to step forward. We are calling our Earth tribe into action.
Greetings, everybody. My name is Makua Ray, and it is my honor to introduce to you Daniel Pinchbeck, author of Breaking Open the Head, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, Notes from the Edge Times, and most recently, How Soon Is Now. Going back a little bit, in 2007, Daniel launched the web magazine Reality Sandwich and co-founded Evolver.net, which led to Evolver Learning Labs and the Alchemist Kitchen in New York City. Also, he edited the publishing imprint Evolver Editions with North Atlantic Books, publishing Charles Eisenstein's Sacred Economics and Jose Arguelles' Manifesto for the Noosphere, 2 groundbreaking books, no doubt. Great to be with you again, Daniel, on this day out of time in this auspicious year 2020.
Thanks, Makuk. Thanks for having me.
Right on. Thank you for joining us. This is the 28th observance of the day out of time since it was inaugurated in 1992. And interestingly, the Gregorian calendar also repeats itself every 28 years. So this really means that we are in the same exact position in that calendar sequence now, 28 years later. Indeed, how soon is now? Here we are. So I want to reflect that we had a chance to have a conversation with you a few years ago, and we being Ruben Ginas, who we want to introduce also in the frame. How you doing, Ruben?
I'm doing super. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
For taking the time to organize the technical part of this interview and on this day out of time, super important day. and happy to have the honor to be with Daniel. I came here for the first time in 2010 in Cancun, wanting to learn about the Mayan calendar. He was one of the speakers along Jose Arguelles, and I had the chance to translate at that time for the organizers of the conference. And it is great that by chance and by synchronicity, we are here 10 years after that,
That's
having a
true.
conversation about the legacy of Jose, the art of time, peace through culture, and regenerative culture. All these seeds that were planted in the consciousness of the planet are now getting to a new crescendo,
Mm, mm.
and this is the time to have the conversations again.
That's right. That's right. I just want to set the frame here. As part of the Lab on Calendar Change, we had the honor of facilitating a great conversation with you, Daniel, a few years ago during the Nexus Global Summit in 2017. The panel, as I just remembered, was called Time, Mind, Nature, Envisioning and Developing a New Operational System for the Future. Other participants were Katie Mejia, as well as Ruben, myself, and you, Daniel. Now, in light of that, considering the fact that your book had just come out then, that's a 3-year window, and I'd be curious to know the arc of that time, some of your reflections right now to that question, how soon is now?
My involvement with Jose Arguelles' ideas started, back after the year 2000. I had written Breaking Open the Head on psychedelic shamanism that came out in 2002, and had begun to take more seriously the indigenous cosmologies and indigenous wisdom of Mesoamerican indigenous people and people from other indigenous groups, and discovered there were some prominent kind of Western fringe thinkers who were fascinated by the Mayan calendar, particularly Jose Arguelles and Terence McKenna. Terence was more, has been more popular, kind of in the collective imagination, probably has a bigger audience. He had these experiences in the early 1970s in Colombia, where he believed this intelligence radiating from the mushroom told him that we were going through this dimensional shift, this eschaton, that it was going to actually happen at around 2012. So that became a cornerstone of his work. And Jose Arguelles also, kind of inspired by psychedelics, by LSD, and by his investigation of shamanism. He'd been an art historian professor. He wrote in his first book, The Transformative Vision, I think it was called, in like 1970 or something. Also became fascinated with this idea that there was some deeper truth to this period being one of a transition or evolutionary kind of shift to a different consciousness, different understanding of time and space. And he also sort of found the Mayan calendar and then kind of, focused his efforts on kind of applying its principles. So yeah, I mean, I wrote about him in great depth in my 2006 book, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl. I was lucky enough to spend some time with him and Stephanie, and ended up not being entirely uncritical of his perspective. Also years later, editing that, as you mentioned, the book up, Manifesto for the New Sphere, which turned out to be his last book. And we were going back and forth of it, unfortunately, when he died in 2011.
Yeah, it is fascinating that here we are 8 years after 2012 and have the chance to observe and be much more critical of the message that Jose left in the Manifesto for the Noosphere and how that connects to the return of Quetzalcoatl. And in the book, Daniel mentioned that or quoted part of Jose's work about Quetzalcoatl not being one man but many man, and not but a mythic complex. Is a consciousness. So I would like to hear from Daniel how this return of Quetzalcoatl prophecy and all the aspects of the ancient Maya connect in the Manifesto for the Noosphere the dots for you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first book that really inspired me about with Argument Whales was the Earth Ascending, where he found these kind of extraordinary mathematical relationships between the Mayan calendar and the I Ching, and also between this kind of interesting magic square that Benjamin Franklin had found in the late 18th century. Franklin being like the head Freemason of the US and kind of the architect of the American Revolution. He saw kind of a numinous correspondence between these things. And he saw that the I Ching, which is a 64 hexagram kind of model, people cast it as a divination system. It's quite extraordinarily precise, actually, when you use it. But that ultimately it's a map of change. It shows how any process develops, evolves, eventually decays, disintegrates, composts, starts again. And he felt that somehow the 260 matrix of the Zulkin, 13 by 20 matrix of the Zulkin, was a kind of much bigger kind of elaboration of that, where I think he said that where the I Ching was to life, the Zulkin was to light. And among the things that he saw as fascinating were these back-tune cycles, which I think are how many, 250 years, 240, 54 years or something. So we were approaching the end of the 13th back-tune, and he really marked it out, even in smaller scales. You could see kind of this technological evolution happening, social evolution, technological evolution, these sort of accelerated evolutions happening. And then another thinker who, I'd say I have somewhat mixed feelings about, Carl Johan Kalaman, also looked at this kind of these almost like a 13-step pyramid leading to some type of realization or evolution of consciousness at the top. There are some things, to keep in mind. In some ways, the Maya are very complex. We really can't understand their state of consciousness, because in some ways they were very advanced and evolved. Like you go to Chichen Itza, it's an obviously unbelievable, achievement of aesthetics and precision, say with Chichen Itza. And yet, as far as we know, they didn't even necessarily know that the, Earth circled around the sun, or the sun circled around, the Milky Way or whatever. Their whole way of understanding their embeddedness in the cosmology was through these precise observations of different cycles and so on. And then they mathematically abstracted it, into this calendar. I personally, and I know this is the day out of time, so we're actually celebrating Jose's system on this date. One of the interesting things that happened when I was, assigned to meet Jose was I was actually writing about him for Rolling Stone, and he discovered that I was his perfect helping partner in his dream spell system.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. But I personally don't ascribe to the dream spell system. It's not something that I use in my daily life, and my sense is that, as fascinating as it is as an experiment, it's not going to be our alternative to the Gregorian calendar in and of itself. That it needs more work and more elaboration. But what I find very, very fascinating, first of all, is the sense that the Mayan calendar is a kind of more advanced instrument for thinking about time and resonance, synchronicity. It's like a different way of understanding time.
Yes.
And that ancient, kind of tool could also be, kind of turned into, into a postmodern tool. It could be upgraded in some way. And I feel that Jose's idea that almost like an artist in space, he was like an artist in time. And his art project was the Stream Spell calendar. So I feel that there are many things that Jose brought to the world that are extremely profound, but they've been a little bit lost by the mainstream because of certain aspects of his psychology and his personality that kind of made them seem very, very ungrounded and kind of disconnected. His own claiming of being this kind of, avatar, of a certain, Mayan king or deity or whatever, got in the way, and then his very, very prophetic tone, where he sort of sounds like Moses or somebody coming down from the tablet, sort of talking to the, it kind of has obstructed the capacity for his more interesting ideas or more grounded ideas to reach the public.
Understood.
And among those ideas was this idea that we're going through a large-scale transition from the pristine environment of the biosphere, which is where humans emerged from, that developed over billions of years of life forming, and then this artificial bridging mechanism of the technosphere, which is all the technology that humans have extruded, in the last couple of centuries. Well, more than that, but accelerating in the last couple of centuries, becoming a geophysical, force on planet Earth just in the last 150 years, and now reaching a point where we're in danger of bringing about our own self-destruction or extinction, within the next half century, if not sooner. But for him, this, the biosphere to the technosphere was this transition that hopefully was leading to another stage of evolutionary development that he called the noosphere, which wasn't his coinage originally. You find the term noosphere used, I think it's by a Russian cosmologist, Vernadsky, but then also by Teilhard de Chardin, who was a French paleontologist and Catholic mystic, who also kind of argued that we were in this like accelerated evolutionary cycle, and that eventually humanity was going to put together this kind of one unified global mind of the planet of the Earth, and then we would be able to steer the Earth evolution in like an incredible, more positive direction. But Teilhard de Chardin thought that process would take 1,000 years from when he was writing. But on the other hand, we've now seen the evolution of technology being so telescoped that we really can't even say where we're going at this point. And it does feel that 2012 was a useful marker. I mean, in my work, I never said that I thought, anything in particular was going to happen in 2012. In fact, I made a film, 2012 Time for Change, where we looked at kind of permaculture, local currencies, indigenous shamanism, and so on, as kind of new tools that postmodern society could actually integrate to help us have a sustainable continuation or regenerative continuation. Yes. So we weren't arguing, I think Terence McKenna in his worst moments sounded like, December 21st, 2012, we were all going to pop into this singularity. And Arguelles, I think, had the problem of really holding to this idea, which in a way, was some of him being like a cheerleader for change. He wanted to say, well, if we can do this, here's the date, let's get it done. But I sometimes wonder if, the way he died, quite mysteriously, I think of a flu or a virus or something in 2011, it's almost like, it's almost like psychologically he didn't want to be around to see what would happen if it didn't happen in the way that he was talking about, which it didn't happen. It wasn't a sudden. I mean, I remember when I interviewed him back in like 2003, he was like, I was like, Jose, what are you talking about? We were in the Iraq war, there's more and more oligarchy and things are getting worse and more militarism. And now it's way worse than it was then on many levels. And he was like, yeah, well, I'm a visionary and I see that my role is to envision the best possible outcome for humanity. And, so that's what I do. And, he was saying that he thought, and that was back in 2003, that by 2012, we would have be taking down the technology, a lot of the extra technosphere and industrial, stuff that would be shifting back into, garden-based community living. We would be holding telepathic seances. And that hasn't really happened. I mean, it's not even totally clear if that's like the direction that everybody wants to go, So, yeah, but he also left open this idea that the noosphere was to some extent a technologically mediated process, that somehow our global communications systems were kind of a necessary prelude for this next level of global communication and interconnectivity, which is something that I've been exploring in my work in How Soon Is Now and in the webinar we're doing now, which is called Building Our Regenerative Future.
Well, that's excellent. I wanted to actually quote your book, in fact, because there's a line in the book that we really drew out. It's actually on your website too, danielpinchbeck.com. I'll just quote this. To realize the latent potential of our digital communications networks, we would build decentralized peer-to-peer systems designed to be perpetually evolving, supporting social coordination, making it easy and hyper-efficient to share skills and resources. Politically, we would establish something like a functional anarchy based on nonviolent satyagraha principles to supersede the current system of military and corporate control. New social technologies would train people to make effective decisions together based on consensus methods as well as ongoing referendums. Quoted from your book, and it's on your website. In some way, it sounds perhaps you're suggesting we need to leverage the capacities of the technology, the technosphere, to help shuttle us past the entropic effects largely accelerated by how we've been more unconsciously using technology, or perhaps have been used by our technology. And one thing I've heard the internet, for example, referred to by Arguelles as proto-telepathy. So also in relationship with this noosphere idea or theme is the idea that as a human collective, we'd be coming more online telepathically. And that a lot of his work also was focused on experiments in telepathy to see if, in fact, we have that elevated skill of communication, transcending technology, but really tapping into our inherent technology as a way to reclaim, I suppose, our place in time, space, circumstance to meet the need of the time. And it's interesting you mentioned also, we're not even sure that that's where everybody wants to go. But I'm really convinced people don't know where they want to go more broadly. I don't know that maybe not that as an expression of where they want to go, but it seems to me there's a tendency generally that people are kind of going along more unconsciously than aware. And I think that also contributes to some of the dilemma we find ourselves facing. I know you've also done quite a lot of work to bring more awareness to the environmental situation that we are facing together. And now, obviously, in light of the coronavirus issue or many other things that have emerged, some of the conversation about our moment of choice, as we're kind of facing down this very extreme situation potentially, that conversation has been all but sidelined. I don't hear much of anything in the dialogue now, even speaking to that. I'd like to ask you a little bit about that, and maybe some of your reflections on where that is, and then also where these emerging aspects are in terms of this regenerative future that you've begun to really hold space for.
Yeah, I want to add a little note, a historic note on that, and that in his book, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, he also spoke about that we are going through a collective planetary rite of initiation, and that this year marks the 33 years of the harmonic convergence, and this is kind of the cusp of this process of initiation. So it would be also interesting to hear how this transition from these technologies, the absorption of the new artificial intelligence technologies that are available right now that were not available in 2012. How do you envision this transition to take place within those two merging
transition?
The merging of this world of the technology with an organic or evolutionary path proposed by Jose.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I was exploring in How Soon Is Now. I mean, the danger, very big threat right now. I mean, I also think it's totally possible that these prophecies were actually looking towards, maybe the human species just going extinct in this period. When you look at what's happening with species extinction and climate change, without a radical, collective raising of awareness, we don't even have a shot. And at the moment, it would be iffy. I mean, even if everybody we did have, on the Regenerative Future webinar, we had a specialist in regenerative agriculture who was saying that if all of the world was to shift to regenerative farming practices, we could sequester a huge amount of CO2. Ocean permaculture also could reverse some of the ocean acidification. But at the moment, we have a lot of, Siberia was just over 100 degrees. We're seeing the forests burning all around the world. My friends from Amazon Watch say that the Amazon rainforest as a whole may collapse the functional system within a few years. We're about to bake in 2 degrees Celsius temperature rise over pre-industrial levels, at which point like a massive kind of feedback loop starts to start, where all these different systems begin to accelerate in the wrong direction. So for humanity to have a chance of, kind of thwarting this disastrous fate, we have to come together a lot better and a lot faster than we have. And we also have to overcome these, this sort of corporate, military, government interlocked complex that's, based on power over and exploitation. And unfortunately, unfortunately, the various efforts that we've been making to do that have not been remotely successful. And if anything, things have gotten a lot worse. And also more and more, as technology develops, it puts more and more powerful powers of surveillance or drone assassination or biowarfare, in the hands of this tiny sociopathic elite. So we're in a, increasingly critical situation that, to be honest, I kind of foresaw 10, 15 years ago when I published the books, and then when I created the Evolver movement, we were trying to address these kind of things. But now it's getting very, very late in the game. So I don't have a lot of, I'm hopeful, I'm curious, but I also think that maybe it's time's up for humanity if we keep going this way. And then another aspect, as you brought up, is a very interesting aspect to me, is the psychic aspects. I mean, through shamanism and then sort of spilling over into my own lives in many ways, my own life in many ways, I discovered that we do have psychic abilities, psychic capacities that are very hard to quantify. They're not quantifiable in the same way material things are, like units of energy or something. But there does have to be a psychic weave. And if you get, I was just reading yesterday that the CIA in the 80s already did an internal paper where they realized that the universe is actually a hologram, and that consciousness is the energy that powers the hologram. And so in a sense, anything is really possible, and that fits very well into Jose Relis's ideas. So even though it might look extremely dire and cataclysmic, it might be possible that that's the necessary precondition to have a rapid shift over or transmutation into finding a way to access and make use of psychic capacity, psychic energies.
Yes.
In another very interesting approach to the Mesoamerican calendar cycle is from this guy, Sergio Magana, who's a Nahuatl lineage holder. And I've worked with him a couple times and interviewed him on my podcast. He published a book called The Dawn of the Sixth Sun. And he argues that according to his teachers, he's of Spanish descent, but he works with Nahuatl elders. The period 2012 to 2021 is actually the transition from the fifth sun to the sixth sun. And in their belief, it's a transition from what they call a sun of light to a sun of darkness. So we've been in a 5,200 year sun of light, which is a time when the focus is on materiality, rationality, reason, science and so on. But as we flip over back into the sun of darkness, the reality itself becomes again more like a dream, like a waking dream. It becomes more psychically permeable, more psychically available. And I do feel that really, when I look at phenomenologically what's happening in my life and what I hear about from other people's lives, that seems to be very much happening right now. Like, the reality seems to be becoming more and more murky and unstable. And, fake news is endemic. We're in Tulum right now, Ruben and I we can't even figure out if the hospitals are full of COVID patients or if they're totally empty of COVID patients. It's like, it's something is happening that seems to be like breaking through from the unconscious. And, so then you become in a very different reality of like quantum superposition, where like potentially anything could happen, but then you really also have to become master of your internal psychic dimension, because if you're projecting negativity, then the shadow is just going to become, back at you very ferociously. So,
initiation.
We're in this dream of reality right now, and it's very hard to see where it's going. And, I do think that Jose's work is very fascinating. I love all sorts of nuances. Like I love his concept that the Maya themselves were actually kind of the like Pakal, the 9th century king who he thought was his incarnation, past incarnation. That these actually may be avatars of what he talks about as a galactic civilization that's figured out how to work with resonance and synchronicity. And so through deep meditation, they're able to, use the Milky Way and the sun to transmit their genetic information as kind of codons using the sequencing of the Mayan calendars, so they can bring that down to different planets that are going through different moments in their evolutionary cycle, and then that provides the keys for this synchronization that can happen. I find that as fascinating as I find Terence McKenna's ideas that maybe the psilocybin mushrooms are actually an extraplanetary kind of civilization in some sense that distributes themselves around the universe as spores on meteorites. I love these ideas because they go against the very literalistic idea that you would have like tin cans coming from, far distant stars and
Right.
landings. Any being that landed here without proper preparation would have to deal with billions of years of viruses and bacteria, and it would be very different. But if you just incarnate on the planet using the genetic sequences that are transmitted, then you're just already born native into this. So there is something very numinous about a place like Palenque. You do feel that there was like a higher order consciousness in some ways far beyond what we understand, that is present there, that is evident there. And if we could find a way to re-access that state of being or that state of consciousness, maybe it would allow for kind of non-linear escape paths, from current crisis of industrial capitalism.
Indeed. Yeah, I think there's a lot there. Certainly encouraging on the level of that ideation that we are capable in consciousness to actually precipitate change that perhaps if we're operating strictly through the lens of the mundane, we don't have the same access. And so I think some of this work that we're envisioning absolutely requires the deliberate action of changing our minds. And one of the reasons I got so inspired by Jose's work is because he argued that to change the calendar is to change the mind. And we wouldn't necessarily know what the mind shift would look like because we're still largely functioning under the Gregorian calendar as the operational system. So for Ruben and I, when we all convened a few years ago, we met that moment for the purpose of actually inspiring the calendar referendum initiative to not revive particularly the Zolkin aspect of Jose's work, but more the functional aspect of a 13-month, 28-day basis, that timing frequency, 1328, could bring us back into sync with nature's timing frequency, biologically, et cetera.
But even 1328 is not entirely accurate, right? Because you also have to account for the leap year. That's where I ended up proposing in the 2012 book that what you would need would be to bring kind of physicists, astrophysicists together with, indigenous people, with people from different lineages, with monotheistic religions. You have the Jews have like a lunar calendar they follow.
Yeah.
That actually develop a new timing instrument, a new frequency.
Exactly.
That recorded with the understanding that we now have. And without doing that, we're a little bit grasping at straws. We can say we like this calendar, we like that calendar, but there really needs to be something that's fully appropriate for our understanding and realization now. The other thing that would be really great about that idea of calendar change would be and I think Jose was the one who turned me on to this idea. The Gregorian calendar is telling us it's totally, structured into the money system and so on, and the tax system and the debt system. So if you were able to say now humanity, we're all adopting this new calendar, it could be like an opportunity for universal forgiveness of debt. Debt being like the tool of imperialism, colonialism that, with its inertia continues to hold all these, third world countries, developing world countries in its thrall.
That's right. That's the essence of today. The day at a time is universal forgiveness. That's the essential focus of today's purpose, celebrated now 28 years. And I think that's still a possibility. But I think also, as you're indicating, we need to have a convening among these various perspectives and participants to look at, okay, what's the next phase in considering such a phase shift? Because clearly operating with the Gregorian calendar is not the answer. And that's the one thing, in many ways, it would be considered the unconscious affecting us because it's just operating. We're not even aware of its impact. And everything else is baked into it, being extractive consciousness and all of these things that are problematic for us. So totally. To become more regenerative and holistic and even model based around nature, which is kind of the argument we've been making for desire towards a systems change that is modeling nature effectively, 12+1 being a 13-month, but specific to the measurement exactly and precisely, obviously there is room to adjust that and to get more coherent in relationship to how this could really be applied among other systems. We're in a time, I think, where systems are changing across the board. So we definitely want to make sure that the calendar is a part of that conversation in ways that it can be actually more of a collaborative approach to it and borrow from ideas that perhaps Jose has suggested and other thinkers as well. But there's definitely something there, not to to
No,
overlook or not include.
Totally agree. I think it was a brilliant insight that the Gregorian calendar is a distorted instrument, and because the months, the derivation of the word months is moons, months, and the fact that we have months that are totally desynchronized from natural cycles, and that's combined with a very rigid, 24 hours, 60 minutes, 60 seconds, milliseconds. So you have this reification and absolute reification of these tiny units of time, and then you have this calendrical system that it has nothing, no reason for being. It's named after Roman emperors for the most part, and it's totally desynchronizes. We're disconnected from nature, partially because of the calendar. So I agree with that, but I don't think we can go back to one that's like approximate. We'd have to actually really do the, that's also where the kind of integrating of the masculine and the feminine,
right,
and intuition would have to come together. I mean, that's what many people have noticed that it seemed when the dream spell movement was gathering force. I also think people should be more careful, not to call Jose's calendar the Mayan calendar, which I still hear all the time. When the dream spell
definitely a misnomer.
Of course, it attracted kind of the hippie wanderers, the flowers from scenes or whatever. Because it was so lunar focused, it kind of attracted people who were like overly lunar, and that's not an answer either. We need to figure out how we get everybody on board with something, it's a good problem. That it's an interesting problem.
Yeah, I think it's important also to recognize that it was 28 years ago in the year 1992, like you were saying at the beginning of this conversation, that we completed 500 years from the discovery of the new world by the old world. And here we are 28 years after that 500-year milestone, and we need to reconsider all the instruments of colonization as to be examined at this point, because it's been proven that they are not doing their best work. So the calendar is the year 2020 kind of holds this energy of balance, of vision. So we want to also project that like a positive vision into the future and make the best use of these psychic abilities that we have. And the idea is to have like from you to kind of finish the conversation, if you could just close your eyes and envision like a positive future or a future of regenerative culture. How does that look like if we transcended all these layers of confusion and all the technological barrier? How does that look to you, like as a person who has explored the two worlds, navigated the shamanic world and navigating this third dimensional reality?
Yeah, I mean, I think the focus of modern industrial civilization has been like materialism, consumerism, the acquisition of material goods, the exploitation of resources, and now we're done with that because we can't keep going in that direction. The planet's going to die on us. It's going to evict us, if it doesn't die on us. But so what is the next, focus? Like human beings always need something to focus on, something that's out on the periphery, and I think it would be, the investigation and the exploration of consciousness is actually the thing that's, waiting to be the refocus of human society. And, as that becomes the focus, then that becomes more of the driver rather than material acquisition or consumption. And society then kind of reorients around that. And, the actual, except for the question of whether we can make it in time in terms of reversing climate change, we know that the technical, changes that we would have to make are quite evident. We have to, stop doing industrial farming. We have to train people back in permaculture and regenerative agriculture practices so that they start sequestering CO2. There's all the fourth industrial revolution ideas, so we can distribute. On the webinar, building our regenerative future, regeneratefuture.net, we had people like James Ehrlich, who's created something called regen villages. So you can create like self-sufficient, villages, housing units that actually, you can grow your food in there, you can compost, you can make your energy from the renewable energy. We can go into being totally locally self-sufficient and resilient. We can use all the technologies that have been developed. We know that we would have to massively reduce, the amount of meat consumption, the amount of plastic consumption. Fossil fuel consumption has to end. We have to shift to renewables. This is all doable if humanity turns its direction, its focus in this direction, in the same way the U.S. was able to, in a few months, go from peacetime to wartime production in the Second World War after Pearl Harbor. All of the factories were shifted to wartime production. Rich people were taxed at 90%. All the resources, everybody agreed that all those resources had to be put into defeating the Nazi menace and so on. So that's the kind of thing that would have to happen now. It would have to be a collective realization that all of our focus and resources have to go into dealing with the ecological emergency. And then we would do it because, when there, as Buckminster Fuller said, under lethal emergencies, vast amount of capital, vast amount of resources suddenly magically appear. And we've seen that, with the coronavirus crisis too. Like, even though the economies of the world stopped, people have still, been getting food. I mean, it's going to get more and more dicey in the next 6 months probably. But yeah, I mean, and then we do have the internet as a kind of global central nervous system. So you could, retrain people in, regenerative farming, permaculture practices, nonviolent communication, meditation. If there was a collective agreement of the direction that we all wanted to go together by building some type of unified global social movement, then we would have the, the capacity to build that movement very quickly.
I want to thank you for taking the time to sit with us right now and in the energy of this day at a time. Thank you so much, and really appreciate your work and your thoughts and your curiosity always. And I'm very excited to see what the future holds for all of us, and especially love your vision. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and it was a great pleasure to be reminded of Jose's momentous work and vision, and to communicate with you guys. I know I'm really proud of you guys for holding this torch of this calendar change movement. It's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. And hopefully it bears fruit at some time in the next few years.
Yeah, hopefully so. Thank you.
Yeah.
Much love. Much love.
You have shown me the way.
wisdom of living in community in Tzanot is I see that everything here functions as this like clock where everything has to happen symbiotically, like someone's starting the sound or someone's playing the music, another person's cooking dinner and taking care of children, and all this eventually starts ticking in harmonic order, where then it creates this a field for metamorphosis where we become our true essence instead of this socially conditioned by society. We come back into harmony with natural cycles and we embody our own essence.
Bienvenidos, hombres y mujeres del Nuevo Mundo. El trabajo comunitario en realidad es parte del proceso espiritual en lo que lleva a los humanos del ego al enjambre, a la abeja mística y al despertar de la unidad.
Actualidad, la Pachamama nos está pidiendo que regresemos a nuestros orígenes, viviendo en armonía y en paz con nuestros hermanos en comunidad y no individualmente, donde nuestra forma de vida está destruyendo y causando estragos a la madre tierra. Aquí vivimos en armonía con la madre tierra, tratando de respetar cada árbol, cada planta y cada animal con la que vivimos, amándonos, respetándonos, compartiendo, bailando, danzando, donde nuestros corazones están queriendo vivir de otra manera en la que hemos vivido erróneamente.
Vivir en comunidad en tierras mayas representa una experiencia invaluable para mí porque nos permite experimentar como un solo organismo la belleza que es compartir y vivir de acuerdo con los principios de la tierra, sincronizados con la tierra. Mi trabajo en la comunidad es traer un poco el conocimiento maya para que entendamos los ciclos y entender cómo evolucionar como un solo organismo y como una sola comunidad en este planeta, y respetando siempre los valores de la naturaleza, el valor de la vida, el valor del agua y el valor de nuestros recursos.
Mi proyecto así de mi corazón ahora es el jardín, el huerto, y siento la necesidad de regresar a las raíces, a cultivar nuestra propia comida, a cuidar nuestra salud a través de la alimentación, a vivir en armonía con la tierra también, porque sabemos que crecemos, cómo lo crecemos, cómo se cosecha, cuál es nuestro modelo de cultivar, que no estamos abusando la tierra, ¿no? Porque eso es nuestra necesidad básica como seres humanos, necesitamos comer. y tener el contacto derecho con nuestra comida nos también trae una gratitud inmensa a la hora de comer, donde pusimos nuestra energía, nuestro corazón, nuestras manos. Es algo que me da mucho sentido y mucho placer poder también aprender aquí en la comunidad, cultivar juntos nuestro alimento.
阿弥陀佛，见唵。